Sarah's hands trembled as she read the text message again, the words blurring through her tears. The message was from her cousin Melissa, sent to the family group chat that included aunts, uncles, and cousins scattered across 3 states. But what made Sarah's heart sink wasn't just the casual, almost gleeful tone. It was the photo attached. Her mountain cabin, her sanctuary, her late husband's final gift to her, occupied by strangers lounging on the deck furniture she and David had picked out together just months before his diagnosis. The cabin sat nestled in the Colorado Rockies, 3 hours from Denver, surrounded by towering pines and accessible only by a winding dirt road that David used to joke was nature's way of keeping the riffraff out. They'd spent their honeymoon there 15 years ago, renting it from an elderly couple who'd eventually decided to sell. David had surprised Sarah on their 10th anniversary by announcing he'd bought it, their own slice of heaven, he'd called it, where they could escape the chaos of their busy lives in Phoenix and where someday they'd retire. Someday had never come for David. Sarah scrolled up through the message thread, her chest tightening with each casual exchange. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Her relatives had been discussing the cabin for weeks, apparently, planning their invasion while she'd been drowning in grief, barely able to get out of bed most mornings, let alone check her phone regularly. Sarah never uses it anymore, Melissa had written 3 weeks ago. It's just sitting there empty. Such a waste. She's probably too sad to go back there, her Aunt Linda had replied. All those memories with David. Exactly. So we'd actually be doing her a favor by using it, keeping it alive, you know? The thread went on, her family members convincing themselves they were being thoughtful, even generous. They'd planned everything, who would stay when, how they'd split the utilities, even discussed renovations they wanted to make, renovations to her home. Her memories, the most recent messages showed they'd already moved in. Melissa's teenage kids had claimed David's study as their gaming room. Uncle Pete was talking about replacing the vintage wood-burning stove with something more efficient. Aunt Linda was planning to brighten up the living room by painting over the warm, honey-colored logs David had spent weeks hand-selecting and treating. Sarah set her phone down and walked to her kitchen window, staring out at the saguaro cacti in her backyard. The Arizona heat was already brutal at 9 a.m., promising another scorching July day. The mountains seemed impossibly far away, like a dream she'd once had of a cooler, greener place where she'd been happy. She'd inherited the cabin 6 months ago when David lost his battle with pancreatic cancer. The legal papers were straightforward. He'd left everything to her, including the cabin that was titled in both their names. She was the sole owner now, though the grief had made everything feel distant and unreal. She'd been to the cabin only once since the funeral, unable to bear the memories that lived in every corner. David's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen sink. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand beside a book he'd never finish. Her phone buzzed with another message from Melissa. "The kids love it here. We're thinking of extending our stay through August. Hope that's okay." The casual presumption took Sarah's breath away. Hope that's okay? As if it were a question being asked rather than a courtesy extended after the fact. As if her own family hadn't just stolen her most precious possession and were now asking permission retroactively. Sarah's fingers hovered over her phone's keyboard. She wanted to type in all caps, to demand they leave immediately, to remind them that this was her property, her sanctuary, her husband's memory. But exhaustion weighed heavier than anger. The past year had drained her of so much fighting David's cancer, fighting insurance companies, fighting the crushing loneliness that followed his death. She didn't have the energy to fight her own family, too. Instead, she typed, "I wish you had asked first." The response came quickly from Melissa. "Oh, Sarah, we didn't want to bother you while you're still grieving. We knew you'd say yes anyway. You're so generous. And honestly, we're doing you a favor. Places like this need to be lived in, not just sitting empty getting all musty and sad. Musty and sad." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the cabin's pine-scented air, the way morning light streamed through the windows to warm the hardwood floors, the sound of wind chimes David had hung on the porch. Nothing about that place was musty or sad. It was alive with love and memories, even in emptiness. Aunt Linda chimed in, "Melissa's right, honey. David wouldn't want you brooding over that place. He'd want it filled with family and laughter again." The presumption of speaking for David, of claiming to know what he would have wanted, hit Sarah like a physical blow. These people had seen David maybe a dozen times in the 15 years they were married. They'd sent sympathy cards and had skipped the funeral because it was too far to travel. But now they were experts on his wishes. "We're taking great care of everything," Uncle Pete added. "Even did some maintenance you needed. Fixed that loose board on the deck, cleaned the gutters. You should thank us, thank them, for breaking into her property and deciding what maintenance it needed." Sarah wondered what else they'd decided needed fixing, what other changes they'd made to the place David had loved exactly as it was. Over the next few days, Sarah watched helplessly as her family documented their unauthorized vacation on social media. Melissa's Instagram stories showed the kids jumping off the cabin's small dock into the lake, using David's fishing equipment without permission. Pete posted photos of himself grilling on the deck, using the custom smoker David had built with his own hands the summer before his diagnosis. Linda shared pictures of the improvements they were making. New throw pillows in colors David would have hated, rearranged furniture that broke up conversation areas he'd carefully planned. Each post felt like another small violation, another piece of David's memory being casually erased and replaced with their own. Sarah found herself screenshotting everything, though she wasn't sure why. Evidence, perhaps, of a crime that wasn't quite illegal, but felt deeply criminal nonetheless. The breaking point came a week later, when Melissa posted a video tour of the cabin, narrating it like a real estate agent showing off a property. "Welcome to our family summer retreat," she announced brightly, panning across the living room, where Sarah and David had spent countless evenings reading by the fireplace. "We've been coming here for years. It's like our own little slice of paradise, our family's retreat. Years." The lies were so casual, so confident, that Sarah wondered if Melissa had convinced herself they were true. She'd rewritten history to justify theft, creating a narrative where the cabin had always belonged to all of them, where Sarah was just the current caretaker rather than the grieving widow and legal owner. The video showed more changes. David's bookshelves had been cleared out to make room for the kids' video games. His collection of vintage fly fishing lures, each one chosen and collected over decades, had been put away somewhere safe, according to Linda's voiceover, though Sarah suspected they'd been thrown out as clutter. The walls that had displayed photos of Sarah and David's adventures, hiking trips, anniversaries, quiet moments, now showed generic nature prints that could have come from any hotel. They were erasing David, and by extension, erasing her, turning their love story into just another vacation rental. Sarah called her lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd helped with David's estate. Patricia listened sympathetically but delivered disappointing news. While the family was absolutely trespassing, getting them removed would require legal action that could take months and cost thousands. "Especially since they're family," Patricia explained. "The courts always hope family disputes can be resolved privately first. They'll want documentation of your attempts to resolve this personally before they'll intervene." So Sarah tried. She called Melissa directly, her heart pounding as the phone rang. "Sarah, hi, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" The fake concern in Melissa's voice made Sarah's jaw clench. "I need you to leave the cabin, Melissa. All of you. It's my property, and I didn't give permission for this." A pause, then a laugh. "Oh, Sarah, you're being silly. We're family. This is what families do. We share. And honestly, you should be grateful. We're keeping the place alive while you figure out what to do with it long term." "I'm not figuring anything out. I'm keeping it. It was David's." "David's gone, honey." Melissa's voice turned sharp. "And you can't live in the past forever. This cabin is too much for you anyway. All that maintenance, the isolation. You don't even like the outdoors that much." The casual dismissal of her marriage, of her capabilities, of her very personality, left Sarah speechless. She did love the outdoors. She and David had hiked hundreds of miles together, had spent countless nights stargazing from the cabin's deck. But Melissa was rewriting her story too, turning her into a helpless widow who needed their intervention. "Please," Sarah whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "It's all I have left of him. Those are our memories you're sleeping in." "Memories don't live in places, Sarah. They live in here." Melissa's tone became patronizingly gentle, as if she were explaining something to a child. "And making new memories honors the old ones. David would want his family to be happy there." There it was again, the claim to know David better than his own wife did. Sarah hung up without another word. The texts that followed were a masterclass in manipulation and gaslighting. The family group chat exploded with messages painting Sarah as unstable, selfish, and mentally unwell. They were worried about her. She was not thinking clearly in her grief. They were trying to help, but she was pushing family away. Uncle Pete even suggested she needed therapy to process her attachment issues. Attachment issues to her own property, to her husband's memory. The worst part was how they'd turned her into the villain of their story. Suddenly, she was the crazy, possessive woman trying to keep a beautiful family retreat empty and unused. They shared the narrative with other relatives, gathering support and sympathy. Sarah's phone buzzed with calls from family members she hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to mediate the situation or convince her to be reasonable. "It's just a building," her Aunt Carol said during one particularly painful call. "David's memory isn't trapped there, and those kids are making such beautiful memories. Isn't that what matters?" Sarah stopped answering the calls. She stopped checking the group chat, but she couldn't stop checking their social media posts, couldn't stop torturing herself with images of strangers living in her love story. 3 weeks into their invasion, disaster struck. Though not in any way Sarah could have predicted. She first learned about it from a news alert on her phone. Wildfire forces evacuations in mountain communities. The Boulder Creek fire had started from a lightning strike during a dry thunderstorm, and the winds were pushing it rapidly through the drought-stressed forest. Sarah's hands shook as she called the emergency information line, then checked evacuation maps online. The cabin was directly in the fire's path. Her first instinct was to call Melissa to make sure the family had evacuated safely, despite everything. But Melissa's phone went straight to voicemail. So did Pete's and Linda's. Sarah spent an agonizing hour trying to reach someone, anyone, before finally getting through to Linda. "Oh, Sarah, thank God you called. This is terrible. We had to evacuate so fast. We barely got the kids and ourselves out safely." Relief flooded through Sarah. "Thank God you're all okay. Where are you staying?" "A hotel in Boulder for now, but Sarah..." Linda's voice broke. "The cabin. We don't know if it's going to make it. The fire is moving so fast, and the road, they're not letting anyone back up there. Not even firefighters can get through safely right now." Sarah closed her eyes, picturing David's sanctuary surrounded by flames. All those years of love and care and memories, potentially turning to ash. "What about insurance?" she whispered. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Linda's voice became strangely formal. "The thing is, Sarah, we weren't exactly official tenants or anything. And some of the improvements we made, the electrical work Pete did in the garage, that deck extension we started, we didn't get permits or anything. We figured since it was family..." The bottom fell out of Sarah's world. What electrical work? What deck extension? "Just small stuff. Pete used to be an electrician, you know. We were going to surprise you with everything when you finally decided to visit. But now, with the insurance investigation and everything, they're asking questions about recent modifications to the property." Sarah's mind reeled. They hadn't just invaded her sanctuary. They'd made unpermitted modifications that could void her insurance coverage. If the cabin survived the fire, she might not be covered for damages. If it burned down, the insurance company might deny her claim entirely based on the unpermitted work. "Linda, you need to document everything Pete did. Get receipts, photos, anything that shows the work was up to code." "Well, that's just it. Pete says he did everything right, but he didn't exactly keep paperwork. And some of the materials, well, we found them locally, saved you money by not going through official suppliers. Bootleg electrical work with questionable materials in a wildfire zone." Sarah felt sick. The conversation ended with Linda promising to figure something out and hoping the fire would just miss the cabin entirely. As if hope and good intentions could undo the potential legal and financial disaster they'd created. For 3 days, Sarah watched news coverage of the Boulder Creek fire with a mixture of terror and strange anticipation. The flames moved like a living thing, consuming drought-dead trees and jumping across fire breaks with terrifying speed. Evacuation zones expanded hourly. The cabin sat directly in the fire's path, and there was nothing anyone could do but wait. On the 4th day, Sarah's phone rang. Patricia, her lawyer. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. The cabin, it's gone. The fire jumped the lake and took out everything on that side. I know how much that place meant to you." Sarah surprised herself by feeling nothing. Or maybe not nothing, maybe relief. The waiting was over. The uncertainty was over. The violation had been erased, even if everything else had been erased with it. But Patricia wasn't finished. There's something else you need to know. I've been in contact with your insurance company, and they're launching a full investigation into the property. Apparently, the fire inspector found evidence of recent unpermitted electrical work that may have actually contributed to how quickly the fire spread through the structure. Contributed how? Faulty wiring in the garage may have created sparks when the power lines went down. It's too early to know for sure. But if that's the case, your family members could be facing serious liability issues, not just with your insurance company, but potentially criminal charges for the unpermitted work, and civil liability if other properties were damaged as a result. Sarah sat down hard. She'd wanted justice, wanted karma to sort out the wrong that had been done to her, but she'd never imagined it would come in the form of potential criminal charges for her own family members. The investigation took weeks to unfold, but when it did, it was thorough and devastating. Pete's electrical work had indeed been faulty, dangerously so. He'd bypassed safety switches and used substandard materials that had created a fire hazard. When the power surge hit during the evacuation, the garage had essentially become a firebomb that accelerated the cabin's destruction and helped the wildfire jump to 3 neighboring properties. The insurance investigation revealed more disturbing details. The family had been using the cabin's address to register vehicles in Colorado for lower insurance rates, committing insurance fraud. They'd been claiming homestead tax exemptions on the property illegally. Melissa had even started advertising it as a vacation rental on various websites, collecting money from strangers while Sarah grieved. The web of deception was vast and systematic. What Sarah had seen as casual family entitlement was actually an organized scheme to essentially steal the property through gradual, illegal appropriation. They'd planned to make so many modifications and establish such a pattern of occupancy that they could eventually claim adverse possession rights, legally stealing the cabin by living there long enough to claim it as abandoned by its legal owner. The criminal charges came first. Pete faced felony charges for the electrical work that had endangered lives and property. Melissa faced fraud charges for the illegal rental income and vehicle registrations. Linda faced conspiracy charges for her role in coordinating the scheme. The civil lawsuits from the neighbors whose properties had burned followed quickly after, but perhaps the most devastating consequence was social. The family's social media documentation of their summer retreat became evidence in multiple court cases. Every smiling photo, every casual video tour, every post about improvements they'd made became proof of their systematic theft and fraud. The very pride they'd taken in their crime became the rope that hanged them. Local news picked up the story. Family members facing criminal charges for stealing and destroying a wildfire widow's cabin through illegal modifications. The narrative they'd constructed of themselves as generous family members helping a grieving relative fell apart under scrutiny. Instead, they became the face of wildfire insurance fraud, their mugshots appearing in newspapers across Colorado. Sarah found herself portrayed as the victim she'd never wanted to be, but also as a woman who'd endured injustice with dignity. News interviews focused on how she'd tried to resolve the family dispute privately, how she'd been more concerned about their safety during the evacuation than about the property theft, how she'd never sought revenge, even as her family had systematically betrayed her trust. "I just wanted my husband's memory to be respected," she told one reporter. "I never wanted anyone to be hurt, even after everything they did." The legal consequences mounted. Pete's electrical contractor's license was revoked, ending his career. Melissa lost her real estate license when the criminal charges were filed, destroying her business. Linda's husband filed for divorce when the full extent of her involvement became clear, leaving her financially devastated. The civil lawsuits from neighbors whose homes had burned would likely bankrupt all of them, but perhaps the most fitting consequence was social exile. The extended family that had initially supported their takeover of the cabin turned against them when the criminal nature of their actions became clear. Relatives who had encouraged Sarah to be reasonable about sharing family property were horrified to learn about the fraud, the illegal rental income, and the dangerous electrical work that had endangered lives. Holiday gatherings became awkward affairs where Melissa, Pete, and Linda were unwelcome. Children who had played together for years were kept apart as parents chose sides. The family fractures ran deep and seemed permanent. 6 months after the fire, Sarah received a settlement check from her insurance company, not just for the cabin's replacement value, but for additional damages related to the illegal modifications and rental income. The criminal restitution orders meant that Melissa, Pete, and Linda would be paying her monthly for years to come, their wages garnished to compensate for their crimes. With the settlement money, Sarah bought a small cottage in the same mountain area, just a few miles from where the cabin had stood. It was modest compared to what she'd lost, but it was honestly hers, legally hers, completely hers. She furnished it simply with pieces that reminded her of David, but weren't haunted by the violation she'd endured. The cottage had a small garden, where she planted flowers David had loved. She hung wind chimes on the porch that played the same gentle notes as the ones he'd chosen for the original cabin. In the evenings, she sat on the deck and watched the sunset paint the mountains the same colors David had loved to photograph. Sometimes, she thought she could feel him there, not trapped in the place, as Melissa had claimed memories were, but present in the peace she'd finally found. The justice that had come hadn't been revenge. It had been truth revealing itself, consequences arriving naturally from choices her family had made. The cottage became a place of healing rather than hiding. Sarah started volunteering with wildfire relief organizations, helping other families navigate insurance claims and legal complications after disasters. She found purpose in preventing others from being victimized the way she had been, in being the advocate she'd wished she'd had. A year after the fire, Sarah received a letter from Melissa, written from the county jail where she was serving a 6-month sentence for the fraud charges. The letter was not quite an apology, but close. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed you to know that I understand now what we took from you. It wasn't just a building, or even a vacation spot. It was your life with David, and we had no right to those memories. I convinced myself we were helping you, but I know now that I was helping myself and lying about it. I hope someday you can forgive us, but I understand if you can't. I hope you find peace somewhere new. Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't respond, but she didn't throw it away either. Forgiveness might come someday, but it would come in her own time, on her own terms. For now, it was enough that truth had won, that dignity had been rewarded, that the natural consequence of their choices had caught up with them. On warm summer evenings, Sarah sat on her cottage porch and watched the stars emerge over the mountains. The peace she felt wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the deep satisfaction of having endured injustice without becoming unjust herself, of having suffered betrayal without becoming bitter, of having lost everything and discovered that what truly mattered couldn't be stolen after all. The cabin was gone, but David's love remained. Her family had broken apart, but her integrity was intact. They had taken her sanctuary, but life had given her something more valuable. The knowledge that truth has its own power, that dignity has its own strength, and that karma doesn't need help from human hands to find its mark. In the end, they had been the architects of their own destruction, and she had been the witness to her own resurrection. The mountains stood eternal around her, cottage, unchanged by human drama, permanent in their beauty and indifferent to ownership. David had been right, she realized. It wasn't about possessing paradise, but about being worthy of it. And in losing everything, she had finally learned to deserving nothing but what was honestly hers. As summer turned to autumn, Sarah planted bulbs in her garden that would bloom the following spring. She was planning for a future now, not just surviving through grief. The cottage would never replace the cabin, but it didn't need to. It was enough to be home,